on the 5th floor of that building where we found the gun and the wrapping paper in which the gun was wrapped, had been wrapped, and upon which we find the full fingerprints of this man Oswald. On that floor, we found the 3 empty shells that had been fired, and 1 shell that had not been fired. In other words, there were 4 shells apparently, and he had fired 3, but didn't fire the 4th one. He then threw the gun aside and came down, and at the entrance of the building, he was stopped by a police officer, and some manager in the building told the police officer, well, he's all right, he works, so you needn't hold him. So they let him go. That's how he got out. And then he got on a bus. The bus driver has identified him and went out to his home and got hold of a jacket that he wanted for some purpose and came back downtown, walking downtown, and the police officer who was killed stopped him, not knowing who he was and not knowing whether he was the man, but they were just on suspicion, and he fired, of course, and killed the police officer. Then he walked about...
You can prove that?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, we can prove that. Then he walked about another 2 blocks and went to the theater. And the woman at the theater window selling the tickets, she was so suspicious of the way he was acting, and she said he was carrying a gun. He had a revolver at that time, with which he had killed the police officer. He went into the theater, and then she notified the police, and the police and our man down there went in there and located this particular man. We had quite a struggle with him. He fought like a regular lion, and he had to be subdued, of course, and his brother was then brought out and, of course, taken to the police headquarters. But he apparently had come down the 5 flights of steps stairway from the 5th floor. So far as we found out, the elevator was not used, although he could have used it, but nobody remembers whether it was or whether it wasn't.
Well, your conclusion is that A, he's the one that did it. B, the man he's after was the president. C, he would have hit him 3 times except the governor turned.
I think that's correct.
4, that there's no connection between he and Ruby that you can detect now. And 5, whether he was connected with the Cuban operation with money you were trying to...
That's what we're trying to nail down now. Because he was strongly pro-Castro, he was strongly anti-American, and he had been in correspondence, which we have, with the Soviet embassy here in Washington, and with the American Civil Liberties Union, and with this Committee for Fair Play to Cuba. We have copies of the correspondence. So we've got him nailed down in his contact with them. None of those letters, however, dealt with any indication of violence or contemplated assassination. They were dealing with the matter of a visa for his wife to go back to Russia. Now, there's one angle of this thing that I'm hopeful to get some word on today. This woman, his wife, had been very hostile. She would not cooperate. She speaks Russian and Russian only. She did say to us yesterday down there that if we could give her assurance that she would be allowed to remain in this country, she might cooperate. I told our agents down there to give her that assurance, that she could stay in this country, and I sent a Russian-speaking agent into Dallas last night to interview her, so that we've got her now, and whether she knows anything or talks anything, I of course don't know and won't know.
Where did he work in the building? On the same floor?
He had access on all floors.
But where was his office?
Well, he didn't have any particular office. He would orders came in for certain books, and some books would be on the 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, and so forth.
But he didn't have any particular place he was stationed?
No, he had no particular place that he was stationed at all. He was just a general packer of the requisitions that came in for school books from the Dallas schools there. And therefore he had access, perfectly proper access, to the 5th floor and to the 6th floor. Usually most of the employees were down on lower floors.
Did anybody see him on the 5th floor?
Yes, he was seen on the 5th floor by one of the workmen there before the assassination took place. He was seen there. So that we've got...
Did you get a picture of him shooting?
No, there was no picture taken of him shooting.
Well, what was this picture that fellow sold for $25,000?
That was a picture taken of the parade and showing Mrs. Kennedy climbing out of the back seat. You see, there was no Secret Service man standing on the back of the car. Usually the presidential car in the past has had steps on the back next to the bumpers, and they've usually been one on either side standing on those steps at the back bumper. Whether the president asked that that not be done, we don't know. And the bubble top was not up, but the bubble top wasn't worth a damn anyway because it made entirely of plastic. And much to my surprise, the Secret Service do not have any armored cars.
Do you have a bulletproof car?
Oh, yes, I do. Yes,
do you think I ought to have one?
I think you most certainly should have one. Most certainly should. Because I have one here. We have one in New York. We use it for different purposes. I use it here for myself, and if we have any raids to make or have to surround a place where anybody's hidden in, we use the bulletproof car on that. Because you can bulletproof the entire car, including the glass. But it means that the top has to remain up. You can never let the top down. It's a regular limousine type, and looks exactly like any other car. But I do think you ought to have a bulletproof car. And but I was surprised the other day when I made inquiry. All that I understand the Secret Service has had 2 cars with metal plates underneath the car to take care of a hand grenade or a bomb that might be thrown out and roll along the street. Well, of course, we don't do those things in this country. In Europe, that's the way they assassinate the heads of state are with bombs. They've been after General de Gaulle, you know, with that sort of thing. But in this country, all of our assassinations have been with guns. And for that reason, I think very definitely I was very much surprised when I learned that this bubble top thing was not bulletproof in any respect, and that the plastic the top to it was down. Of course, the president had insisted upon that so that he could stand up and wave to the crowd. Now, it seems to me that the president ought to always be in a bulletproof car. It certainly would prevent anything like this ever happening again. It doesn't mean you could have 1,000 Secret Service men on guard and still a sniper can snipe you from up in the window if you are exposed, like the president was. But he can't do it if you have a solid top, bulletproof top to it, as it should be.
You mean I ride around my ranch? I ought to be in a bulletproof car?
Well, I would certainly think so, Mr. President. It seems to me that car down at your ranch there, the little car that we rode around in when I was down there, I think that ought to be bulletproof. I think it ought to be done very quietly. There's a concern that is out, I think, in Cincinnati, where we have our cars bulletproof. I think we've got 4. We've got one on the West Coast, one in New York, and one here. And I think it can be done quietly without any publicity being given to it or any pictures being taken of it if it's handled properly. But I think you ought to have, because on that ranch there, it's perfectly easy for somebody to get onto the ranch.
I think those entrances all ought to be guarded, though, don't you?
Well, I think by all means. I think you've got to recognize, you've got to really almost be in the capacity of a so-called prisoner. Because without that security, anything can be done. Now, we've got a lot of letters and phone calls over the last 3 or 4 or 5 days. We've got one about this parade the other day that they were going to try to kill you then. And I talked with the Attorney General about it. I was very much opposed to that marching to the White House.
Well, we Secret Service has told them not to, but the family felt otherwise.
Well, that's what Bobby told me, because when I heard of it, I talked with the Secret Service, and they were very much opposed to it. I was very much opposed to it because it was even worse than down there at Dallas. You were walking down the center of the street.
I think that's right.
Dallas, you were on the center of the street, and somebody on the sidewalk could dash out. I noticed even on Pennsylvania Avenue here, I viewed the procession coming back from the Capitol, and while they had police signs along the curbstone, looking at the crowd, when the parade came along, the police turned around and looked at the parade, which was the worst thing to do. They also had a line of soldiers, but they were looking at the parade.
Well, I'm going to take every precaution I can, and I want to talk to you, and I wish you'd put down your thoughts on that a little bit, because you're more than the head of the Federal Bureau, as far as I'm concerned. You're my brother and personal friend, and you have been for 25, 30 years.
Well, you have been for 30 years. I know. Well, you just been having your time.
Absolutely not.
So you just, I got more confidence.
Absolutely not. town, so I've got more confidence
in your judgment than anybody in town. So you just put down some of
your judgment than anybody, and you just put down
some of the things you think ought to happen, and I won't involve your court here, get you in jurisdictional disputes or anything, but I'd like to at least advocate them as my opinion.
I'll be very glad to, indeed. I certainly appreciate your confidence.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Fine, President.